Hello, Foundry Gents! Exclamation point. Are we looking at a quote unquote new foundational hardware power tier developing around PlayStation 5 level? We have Steam Machine, PS6 handheld, PS5 power saver, Steam Deck 2, etc., all potentially coming in relatively close to each other and probably looking at having support for new games well into the future. I think there's some devices there that are well below the PlayStation 5 level, Steam Deck, for example. But, Alex, there is something to be said for the fact that we are probably going to be looking at an extremely long cross-generational period, even when new hardware arrives. And that by that point, they're probably going to be well in excess of 100 million PlayStation 5s out there. And maybe that does suddenly become the kind of baseline specification, or within that area, give or take, especially when you've got Steam Machine effectively doing the same thing.
Right. And I think reasons for it also, like a lot of the manufacturing congregating around this is just what we talked about in the last section. Oh, wow, everything's from AMD. We're getting a lot of portfolio devices from AMD. So the fact that they're manufacturing of a variety of on the nodes that they're currently on lends to these being the cheapest, best market devices makes actually quite a bit of sense. And I think that's one of the big reasons in terms of like where die shrinking has gone to and the expense of getting smaller lends itself to a device of an SoC that is a certain size, or at least the GPU CPU cluster that is of a certain size, or a GPU of a certain size that says actually this is where it becomes affordable, versus going a bit larger. Series X style is maybe a little bit less affordable. Especially when we look at the price between the PS5 and the Series X currently. So I think there's something to be said about a certain size of processor that is much more affordable than another.
Okay. Oliver?
Yeah, I just think the reality is that like cross-gen is going to last forever. The economics of game development are such that you want to ship on everything. So you're going to end up wanting to ship on these devices, on these Switch 2s, on these Steam Decks, on these PS6 handhelds, on everything. And that's just going to be the way that it is for a long time to come. But I think it's important to like clarify that there could be a similar band of performance around this kind of like sub PS5 level, somewhere in that range of devices, in terms of rasterization performance in games. But in terms of ray tracing performance and machine learning performance, there's going to be a big difference between like a PS6 handheld and maybe a PS5 in power saver mode, I would presume, dramatically in favor of the PS6 handheld, at least if RDNA 5 is all it's cracked up to be. There should be a fairly large difference there. And that could extend to support for more modern technologies that might not be practical to deliver a game that uses path tracing potentially on a PlayStation 5 console. Maybe that kind of thing would be more feasible on an RDNA 5 based handheld of sufficient capability. Maybe that would be feasible between a combination of ray tracing technologies, of some kind of ray reconstruction variant, and of having a very high RT performance, very performant RT performance. That could be feasible on such a device, but not feasible on another device that does not have that set of features and capabilities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an interesting question. Basically, I think there's a delicate balancing act here that is facing developers going forward. First of all, new hardware has to justify itself. So, we're going to be looking to developers to actually tap into like machine learning features, ray tracing, etc., because that's the direction of travel. But at the same time, gaming hardware has to persist, has to survive for a lot longer now for various reasons. And how they're going to do this, I'm not quite sure. I guess, you could say that Cyberpunk is a very different experience comparing RT Overdrive to, playing it on Switch 2. But fundamentally, it is still, a very similar game. So, yeah, it's going to be a tricky one. I'm not quite sure how they're going to do it, we just have to wait and see. But I do think that there is this kind of like ability to need to develop games that service a much wider range of devices. And I do think that is slightly problematic because, when you look at id Software, and what they've done with IdTech, they want to move on from rasterization, and having to accommodate machines that will quote unquote hold back the new generation, that could be challenging. So I don't have the answers, but I'm looking to the developers to supply them.